Joining me now is David Gazzard, DPG Advisory Director and former Liberal advisor, and Ben Oquist, the Executive Director of the Australia Institute, former Greens advisor. Gentlemen, thank you very much, as always. David Gazzard, is it a risk to be detailing the withdrawal of the supports well before some of the states even have some of the thresholds in sight in terms of the vaccine targets?
No, I don't think so, because we are rapidly approaching some of those targets. I think it's a clear signal to the premiers that the money train can't go on forever. And I think it's a clear signal to those who were on those support payments with unemployment really low that it's time to start thinking about getting off the bridge, which was what the support payments were designed to do, and getting back to work in an open economy. There's a couple of reasons I think this is wise. A, fiscally, we can't go on continuing to provide support forever, or as Jim Chalmers says, into the distant future. Money doesn't grow on trees. But the other thing is, if you go on forever, or you go on into the future, you're at risk of creating a permanent underclass of social welfare recipients. If you look back to when there was turmoil in the financial markets back under the Labor government, there are still the global financial crisis. There are still 40% of people who were on welfare payments still receiving those payments. So you really want to get this ended as quickly as you can for the benefits of the economy and for those who are receiving them and need to get back to work.
And Ben Oquist, the Treasurer, was at pains to point out this is consistent with what the state leaders had agreed to under the National Cabinet Plan.
Well, I think if there are businesses still affected by lockdowns and the sluggish economy because of them, they should be supported. The vaccination rates are one thing, but there are still a whole lot of health restrictions that are going to be in place that prevent businesses operating at full potential and therefore people getting jobs. So I think you want to be careful to look after them, and I think that would be sensible to be a bit more cautious about it, sensible for those individuals affected and sensible for the economy overall. Just here in the ACT, for example, there only some businesses are going to be able to open up with the 4 square metre rule and others aren't going to be. That's not their fault. Vaccinations are important, but other health measures are important as well. Remember, kids under 12 have no protection other than ventilation and masks. So it's going to be a staggered reopening, and vaccinations are important, but they're not everything. And other restrictions mean business and individuals will need further support, I think.
Big developments today on the climate front. We've seen, David Gazzard, pressure internationally, now much closer to home on the federal government, coming from the coalition government in the largest state in the nation, with a very ambitious 2030 target. Matt Kean was on the program a bit earlier arguing the merits of it. Can Scott Morrison bring the federal nationals with him, as Gladys Berejiklian has, do you think, to get a more ambitious plan to take to those climate talks?
Well, clearly there's a lot of discussion going on within the coalition at the moment. I would say it's probable. I would also, say that if states want to go further and faster, that's up to them. It's up to them to detail how they're going to get there, and it might be entirely possible to get there. With technology, a lot of things are becoming possible. I think what is important in this debate, though, is that if a party is going to get to this position, it details the plan under which it's going to do so. It's certainly consistent with everything that the Prime Minister said before the last election, and this was a debate that I think Bill Shorten should have heeded at the time, but didn't. He went in with a target without nominating what the price was going to be. So it's important, if you're going to get on that journey, to have it fully figured out, to have a plan that stands up to rigour. And that's clearly what the coalition is doing now. Now, here's the other side to this politically. The Labor Party are now really a party of inner city voters, whereas the coalition has a large proportion of regional Australia. And that includes mining, it includes forestry, it includes agriculture. So there are legitimate concerns from coalition members about how we would reach a target like that. So I think they're on the road to getting there, but the Prime Minister has to bring the coalition with him. I think New South Wales shows that it is possible to bring the National Party with you, and that's a good thing. And if you can achieve those targets earlier, that's a good thing as well. One of the things that Australia has already done is it's already met its commitments with Paris, where a lot of other countries have signed up to these targets and then failed to get within a bull's roar of meeting those objectives. And no doubt they'll be first in the queue at Glasgow to say they're going to meet the new targets as well. Australia sticks by its commitments, and I think it's reasonable for voters to understand the cost in the government going in this direction.
Ben Oquist, how significant in your mind is this move by the Berejiklian government?
I think it's a policy and political bombshell that's landed right in Barnaby Joyce's lap and the Prime Minister's. It's embarrassment to them, isn't it? Because yes, Scott Morrison is going to adopt a net zero by 2050 target, but really the world's moved on with that. As we've been discussing for many months now, net zero by 2050 is done by the rest of the world, and Scott Morrison, of course, has to do that, and he will do that. He'll announce it very soon, all the while expanding fossil fuel development, and people will know it's a bit of a fraud. But what Matt Kean's done today, it of course is a higher 2030 target, which is where the rest of the world is focusing for the big Glasgow summit. The EU's upped its target, Biden's upped its target, the UK's upped its target. And I think the real risk here is now the states are acting, and this really reminds me of course, what happened to John Howard in the 2007 election. Because of the lack of action on climate change from the federal government, the states started moving, and the Prime Minister got left behind and looked like yesterday's figure. And I think that's the risk that the Prime Minister is making now. Yes, he's going to announce net zero by 2050, but the world and now the states will have moved on past that, and it'll just look a bit like yesterday's man, and that's a danger going into a federal election, that you're not looking like you're with it. The states are moving, the world's moving, Biden's moving, the jobs are moving in that direction, and this is a big political risk from the Prime Minister. Net zero by 2050 just isn't going to cut it while he's expanding fossil fuel developments.
David, the Minister, New South Wales Minister, Matt Kean, said that all of our main allies, that Biden, Johnson, others are going to the climate talks. Today, Malcolm Turnbull said that history is written by those who show up, and saying that if the Prime Minister doesn't go, he'll be indicating his priorities. Should he be going to Glasgow, in your view?
I think that is still something that, the Prime Minister needs to discuss with his party room. But just going back to Ben's answer before, I mean, this really sort of exposes the risk that underscores exactly what I was saying earlier. Ben's already moved on from net zero by 2050.
So the world has actually refused, talking about what's going to be debated at Glasgow is the 2030
at what cost? I mean, this is the point, right? At what cost? So we've now moved on from
at the cost of
net zero by 2050 to now abolishing all fossil fuels. Is that really what you're saying? Have we moved beyond that now?
Fossil fuels are going to go by 2050. That's right.
But Ben, we haven't even underscored that the target you've wanted us to get to before you've moved the goalposts to the next area without explaining what the cost is going to be.
So and Glasgow.
We're now abolishing all fossil fuels, are we? At what cost? I mean, what is the next goalpost? What is the next goalpost that the Greens
have saving the planet?
I think it's reasonable, and most Australians would expect to know what the government is doing and what the cost will be.
David Gazzard and Ben Oquist, appreciate it as always.
Thanks, Kieran. Thanks, David. The bottom 20% get nothing. They're really unfair tax cuts.
People want to see much stronger action from the government when it comes to climate change.
It's no coincidence that we have a wages crisis in Australia.
Transitioning to net zero emissions, it doesn't seem like there's much room for gas.